36 disasters on rides, 7 levels of horror. I have put together a real iceberg of stories, the darkest, the scariest, and the most nightmarish incidents that have happened in amusement parks. We will dive deeper and deeper, from strange and disturbing events to truly brutal, bloody, and catastrophic tragedies that forever changed people's lives and the history of the industry. And we will start from the very tip of this icy nightmare. The Smiler. Crash. A musical jingle, bright lights, huge banners. Alton Towers advertised the Smiler as the first ride in the world with 14 inversions. A huge metal structure resembling a web, twisted with loops, cobra rolls, barrel rolls, 5 trains operating at the same time, up to 960 people per hour, and all of it under the control of an automatic safety system. On the 2nd of June 2015, the park was packed, and the engineers tried to bring the 5th train back onto the line after a technical fault. Just before that, a test train had stalled on the track, but the staff misread the control panel, decided it was a system error, and manually bypassed the lockout without even checking the track with their own eyes. A few minutes later, a loaded train at full speed, about 50 miles per hour, crashed into the stalled train. The front row was completely crushed. 2 young women, Leah Washington and Vicky Balk, lost their legs below the knee. Other passengers suffered broken knees, internal injuries, a punctured lung. After the impact, the train rocked back and forth, intensifying the pain of people who were trapped in the metal. The investigation uncovered an entire system of failures: no risk assessment, poor staff training, no protocol for manually disabling the safety systems. Management tried to put the blame on the operator, but prosecutors stated clearly, this was not the fault of one person. The working culture of the entire park was at fault. The company Merlin Entertainments admitted to violating safety rules and received a record fine of £5 million. The Smiler was upgraded and reopened in 2016, but for the victims, these changes no longer meant anything. Level 1. Superman Tower of Power. It is just a new ride, the tallest in the world. It shoots you up in an instant and then drops you into free fall. That is how they advertised the Superman Tower of Power in the Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom Park. In June 2007, 13-year-old Caitlin Lassiter was standing in line for her second ride of the day. The tower, 177 feet high, lifted the cabin to the top and dropped the passengers down at 54 miles per hour. The mechanism is simple. Steel cables pull the gondola, pneumatic pistons control the movement, and the emergency braking system is supposed to stop the ascent at the slightest malfunction. But as the cabin began to rise, one of the cables snapped sharply, at a height of roughly from 35 to 45 feet. The torn cable, like a mad snake, wrapped itself around Caitlin's neck and legs in a monstrous, unthinkable incident. People screamed. The operators hesitated and lost 10 precious seconds before pushing the emergency stop. But it was too late. The gondola had already reached the top and switched into free fall mode. It was no longer possible to stop it. During the fall, the slackened cables tightened, and like blades they sliced through the girl's body. Her left femur was shattered. Both feet were severed above the ankles. The cable around her neck somehow slipped off, the only thing that saved her life in that moment. The investigation showed that for years, the park had ignored basic maintenance. Instead of cotton cloths, as required by the Intamin Company manual, the technicians rubbed the cables with cornstarch for better sliding. In reality, the starch destroyed the metal, causing corrosion. The tragedy forced the state of Kentucky to completely forbid miners from working as operators on extreme rides. If it seems to you that this story has reached the limit of horror, we are only beginning the descent. From here on, everything becomes more frightening, more complicated, and at times, completely inexplicable. Disneyland, the catastrophe on the sailing ship Columbia. On the 24th of December 1998, Disneyland was full of holiday bustle. Dozens of families took pictures by the Christmas trees, Music played throughout the park, and hundreds of guests stood at the dock waiting to board the sailing ship Columbia. It is an exact 110-foot replica of the ship that made the first circumnavigation under the American flag. The vessel sailed along an artificial river on a hidden underwater track and was usually moored with thick hemp mooring lines. But that day, everything was different. For unknown reasons, employees used not the traditional linen rope, specially designed to snap in an emergency, but a cheaper and very strong nylon rope. Nylon does not break. It stretches like rubber, creating monstrous tension. As the ship approached the dock, 30-year-old employee Christine Carpenter secured this nylon rope to a heavy cast iron cleat. But the captains, distracted and not watching the speed, brought the vessel in too fast. The rope stretched to the limit, and at 10:40 in the morning, the huge cast iron fitting tore out of the old wooden hull and flew into the crowd like a cannonball. There was a crack, a scream, and then silence. The cleat struck Lanny Dawson in the face. His skull was shattered, brain tissue was damaged. His wife Liu Wang suffered severe facial injuries and fainted beside him. Eyewitnesses claimed they saw shreds of skin and blood on the planks. While families screamed and prayed, employees tried to disinfect the site. It would later emerge that Disney had managed to wash away the traces with high-pressure water before the police arrived. The investigation confirmed the park had deliberately replaced safe hemp ropes with cheap nylon ones. Some employees at the mooring lines were untrained. The wooden hull of the ship was rotting. The cleat's mounts had not met load requirements for a long time. Dawson died 11 hours later in a state of brain death. Wong underwent years of surgeries. Disney paid $25 million without admitting fault. After this, the park introduced new protocols, additional warning signals, a return to hemp ropes, and constant police presence at the site. The Killer Orca at SeaWorld Orlando. One of the most popular shows at SeaWorld Orlando for many years was the Dine with Shamu program, a romanticized illusion of friendship between trainers and orcas. Guests sat right at the edge of the pool, ordering steaks and desserts, and nearby huge black and white giants, like obedient dogs, followed commands, flashed smiles, and allowed themselves to be petted. A fairy tale, a reinforced concrete illusion of safety. But on the 24th of February 2010, this illusion shattered in seconds. The experienced trainer Dawn Branchot, 16 years of experience, was working with Tilikum, a 12-ton male, legendary for the park, but with a much more sinister reputation outside it. He was involved in the death of a trainer in Canada in 1991, and in 1999 he was found with a man's body on his back. To this day, no one knows how that person ended up in the pool. During a normal post-show interaction, Dawn lay on the edge of the platform, stroking Tilikum's head. Everything looked familiar, calm, almost touching. Until in one instant, the huge jaws grabbed her. Either by her ponytail or by her arm, witnesses disagree on the details, and dragged her under the water. What followed was a 45-minute nightmare. Tilikum would not let go of the body, dodging nets, ignoring lures, continuing to circle with Dawn like with prey. Witnesses said that he would sometimes surface, showing her lifeless body, then pull her back into the depths. The autopsy later showed drowning, a severed spine, broken ribs, torn scalp, horrific injuries incompatible with life, and none of this should have come as a surprise. Internal SeaWorld documents recorded more than 100 incidents of orca aggression since the late 1980s, including 2 fatal episodes involving Tilikum specifically. But the park continued to use him in shows, only slightly changing the rules. They banned trainers from swimming with him, but did not ban them from standing next to him, did not ban them from leaning over the water. OSHA fined the park $75,000 for knowingly creating a hazard. Tilikum continued performing for another 7 years, until he died in 2017. Dawn's death became a watershed moment, especially after the release of the documentary film Blackfish, which called into question the entire captive marine park industry. But the consequences came too late. SeaWorld merely abandoned theatrical shows, yet Tilikum's descendants still live in captivity. The collapse of a pendulum in India, July 2019. Young people came to Adventure Park in Ahmedabad seeking bright emotions. One of the main rides was Discovery, a giant machine, a ring with 32 seats, rotating around its axis and swinging like a massive pendulum. But during one of the cycles, a nightmarish sound rang out, a dull metallic crack. The main beam, the key load-bearing element, fractured and broke. The lower part of the structure fell down together with the passengers, smashing into steel supports. People were thrown, twisted seats fell onto each other. 2 people died on the spot. 29 people received severe injuries, broken limbs, open wounds, crushed chests. Teenagers, young couples, friends, all were captured in that instant of death. Witness videos taken on phones spread across social networks within minutes. The expert report showed a welded seam had failed. The cable of the load-bearing unit was in critical condition. The park ignored inspections. 2 weeks earlier, a nearly identical defect had occurred on the Ferris wheel, and no one did anything. As a result, 6 people were arrested. Park manager Ghanshyam Patel, his son, and several operators. Families of the deceased received about $122,000. But by 2025, no one had yet been convicted. The case drags on, like many similar ones in the region. LA Feria, Chapultepec, the collapse of the Quimera coaster. On the 28th of September 2019 in Mexico City, on the old but beloved coaster Quimera, everything seemed to be going as usual. This coaster had already traveled across continents. It was built in Germany, worked in the United States, in Canada, and only then ended up in La Feria Chapultepec. At 14:30, the last car of the train suddenly derailed during one of the looping elements. People on the ground heard a metallic screech, then saw the car flip upside down, slam into a metal support, and fall from a height of roughly 10 meters. 2 young men died instantly from severe traumatic brain injuries. 2 women received the gravest injuries. 6 other people were in a state of shock. And when investigators opened the folders with maintenance logs, it became clear. It was a miracle that the tragedy happened only in 2019. The documents showed corrosion everywhere, welds destroyed, bolts not matching specifications, daily inspections, almost never carried out. The coaster was operational at only 58%, but they still ran it. The manual forbade operation when rails were damaged or fastenings were loose. These conditions had existed for months, but the park ignored everything. The license was revoked immediately. The park closed forever on the 13th of October. By 2023, the ride had been dismantled. The remains were sent to the United States for reconstruction to give it a second life, but this time, a safe one. Action Park, Death on the Alpine Slide. There was not a single ride in Action Park that could be called safe, but the Alpine Slide held a special place in this insane pantheon. It was a nearly 2,700-foot track made of a mixture of concrete, fiberglass, and asbestos. Narrow, fast, unpredictable. Guests were supposed to slide down it on plastic sleds, controlling their speed with a single lever. In reality, the lever had only 2 modes, too slow and lethal. Many sleds were defective, the brakes did not work, and the employees joked about it so often that no one took the warnings seriously anymore. People in swimsuits sat down, not really understanding what awaited them. On the 8th of July, 1980, 19-year-old George Larson Jr. sat on a sled and started down. He did not know that the brake on his sled did not function at all. Within seconds, the sled lost contact with the track, flew off a turn, and threw him aside. George hit his head on the rocks and died 8 hours later. But then the park's director, Gene Mulvihill, immediately began rewriting reality. He claimed that George was supposedly a park employee riding at night in the rain to remove Action Park's responsibility. The problem was that all of this was a lie. George had not worked there for a long time. It was a sunny day. He was on vacation. He was an ordinary visitor. Regulators? They never even came. The park owners were so powerful in the town that no one dared to cross them. Insurance company? The park did not have real insurance at all, only a fake shell company in the Cayman Islands, created by the owner himself to avoid payouts. The family received $100,000 and a strict gag order. The track continued to operate for another 16 years, breaking arms, legs, jaws. Only in 1984 to 1985, 14 fractures and 26 head injuries were officially recorded. And by the time Action Park closed, a total of 6 people had died there, but not a single top manager ever went to jail. Kings Island, Black Sunday. On the 9th of June 1991, something happened in the Kings Island Park that the press would later call Black Sunday. 2 independent fatal incidents within 1 hour. The first tragedy. 22-year-old Timothy Binning leaned over a pond in the Oktoberfest area to splash water at a friend. He did not know that the pond was powered by a faulty pump with exposed wires. As soon as his hand touched the surface, a powerful current struck him, knocking him unconscious straight into the water. A friend and a security guard tried to pull Timothy out, and they too were killed by the electricity. They fell beside him, never managing to save anyone. Timothy miraculously survived, but suffered severe burns and irreversible damage. His friends did not. For $20, the cost of a device that could have cut off the current in case of a short, the deaths of 2 people could have been prevented. But it was never installed. The second tragedy. An hour later, while the park was still reeling from the shock, 32-year-old Candy Taylor decided to ride the Flight Commander. It was a strange, almost experimental ride. A capsule at a height of 70 feet rotated and was controlled by a joystick. She sat in the cabin alone. On a turn, her capsule suddenly made a sharp tilt. The platform flipped, leaving Candy hanging upside down. Not properly restrained by a loosened belt, she slipped under the flip-down restraint and fell onto the concrete. She died instantly. Her blood alcohol content was 3 times the legal limit. But the main problem was the design. Vulnerable, requiring a perfect body position, illogical, built for sober adults in enclosed safety systems. That night, helicopters carried 3 bodies away from the park. The world froze in horror. The media named the events Black Sunday. The park received a fine of $23,500, and a year later modified the capsules. But the stain remained forever. Visitors saw that even in a big park, everything can go wrong, twice, in 1 hour. Oakwood, death on the Hydro water coaster. April 2004, Wales. 16-year-old Hayley Williams was getting ready to ride Hydro, the flagship water coaster of the Oakwood Park, which promised the fastest and wettest drop in Europe. The lap bar and seatbelt were supposed to work together. But in the design, there was a fatal hidden flaw. Neither of these elements alone could hold a person under heavy G-forces. And exactly such forces arose on the main drop. Operators often did not touch the belts with their hands at all. They just glanced from a distance. When Hayley sat closer to the back of the boat, no one noticed that the lap bar had not locked. Security cameras would later show, right during the ascent the girl tries to hold on, something is going wrong. A few seconds later, she was thrown up and out. She hit a metal structure and crashed into the pool below. Bystanders pulled her out, but the injuries were fatal. Internal damage left no chance of survival. An engineer later proved that he could climb out of the seat even with the bar locked. The design had been dangerous from the very beginning. Staff were trained for only 20 minutes. Many of them could not reach all the seat belts. Inspections were merely formal. In 2008, the park was fined £250,000. The family considered the punishment laughable. Hydro was renamed and fitted with over-the-shoulder restraints, but that did not bring Hayley back. Six Flags. Darien Lake. The death of a double amputee veteran, June 2011. 29-year-old James Hackemer, a veteran and war hero from Iraq who had lost both legs in an explosion in 2008, came to Darien Lake Park with his family. Ride of Steel is one of the tallest and fastest coasters in the region, 208 feet high, 73 miles per hour. At the entrance, a clear rule hung. Rider must have 2 functioning legs, but the staff, seeing James, escorted him through special access for people with disabilities and seated him in the front row. Relatives helped him settle in, buckling him with what looked like an ordinary lap bar. The operators checked the restraint and gave the green light. On the first big drop, the wind blew his baseball cap off. James raised his hands as if trying to catch it, and at that moment, his torso rose above the seat. A person without legs has no point of leverage to hold himself under G-forces. He was thrown out of the car. He hit a metal structure and fell from a height of more than 45 meters. Passengers returned to the station. One seat was empty, but the bar was still closed. Staff found his body. His army dog tags lay nearby. The ride was not shut down. The park continued to operate the same day while workers washed blood off the supports. Holiday World, a fatal fall from Raven. The 31st of May 2003, Holiday World Park, Indiana. Raven is a wooden roller coaster, a favorite among enthusiasts. Sharp turns, a famous drop of almost 26 meters, and speeds approaching 50 miles per hour. In 8 years of operation, there had not been a single incident. The ride was considered exemplary. But that day, 32-year-old Tamar Fellner came with a group of thrill-seekers who visited parks for adrenaline. She sat in the last seat of the last car, the place where G-forces are especially strong. Witnesses later said, during the runs, she stood or raised herself up despite the fixed lap bar and seatbelt. The third drop, that very sharp 15-meter plunge, and a powerful negative G effect pushed her out of the car. She flew about 18 meters and fell onto the track in front of the train. Passengers and a doctor on site tried to give rescue breaths and chest compressions, but the injuries were incompatible with life. The investigation established the equipment was working correctly. The belt had been fastened before the start, but was found unbuckled after the accident. Experts concluded she had freed the belt herself and violated the seating rules. The family filed a lawsuit, but there were no criminal charges. Former park president Will Koch later said a phrase that became a quote for the entire industry. If a person cheats the safety system, physics takes over from there. Raven still operates today. Since then, not a single incident. England, the death of a youth in a closed fun fair. On the 3rd of August 2022 in the Pencher Gardens City Park in Dover, the early morning was quiet until a scream rang out. 14-year-old Mackenzie Croxford Cook and 4 friends had broken into the fairground, which had not yet opened. The teenagers played on the inflatables, ran around the empty site, and then approached the body count, a large rotating structure consisting of massive metal arms and gondolas. Even without power, this mechanism could freely rotate by inertia. The kids began to rock the platform manually and then watched with interest as it continued to move. Mackenzie had always been the instigator, and carried away by the excitement, he climbed onto the steel frame of the rising mechanism. But at the moment when he was scrambling upward, a heavy metal arm, continuing its slow rotation, pressed him against a support, crushing his chest and abdomen. His friends tried to turn the structure back, screamed, tugged at the metal, but the mass of the mechanism was too great. When rescuers arrived, the teenager's body was hanging at a height of about 2 meters. He was unconscious, with torn internal organs, liver, spleen. The doctors could do nothing. The site was guarded only during working hours. At night, no one was required to control the perimeter. That was what the local council's rules said. The accident turned out to be inevitable because the system did not account for human curiosity, and teenagers will always be teenagers. Level 3. Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin, The Death of Little Brandon, 2000. On the 22nd of September 2000, 4-year-old Brandon Zucker sat in one of the cartoon taxis of the Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin ride together with his mother and brother. It is a bright, chaotic spinning ride where the car behaves like a mad thing. It bounces, twists, spins. But as soon as the car jerked sharply to the side, Brandon slipped. The belt did not work. The small body fell through the open side and ended up directly under the next car. That car dragged him for about 3 meters, pinning him between the platform and the body. His father screamed, trying to shout to the operators. The ride kept moving. The child was pinned for about 10 minutes. His pelvis was shattered, a lung was pierced, oxygen to the brain stopped. He survived, but the brain damage was irreversible. The family sued for enough money for lifelong care, but Disney did not admit fault. Brandon was never able to walk or speak again. In 2009, at the age of 13, he died in his mother's arms. His curved spine could no longer let air pass. Disney added additional sensors, automatic doors, but officially stated that procedures were followed. The cameras did not record the moment of the tragedy, and that became one more dark stain. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, a fatal derailment. On the 5th of September 2003, Disneyland began the day as usual. Bright smiles, music, hordes of guests, excitement. The Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, one of the park's signature hits, had been carrying people through the swift canyons of a stylized Wild West for many years. Train number 2 completed 12 cycles that day without incidents. But 3 days earlier, it had undergone maintenance, and a mistake was made that would become fatal. 2 bolts holding the left guide assembly of the wheel set were not fully tightened, and the securing safety wire was missing entirely. What should have been protected from vibration was held only by hope. At 11:20, during the lift in the tunnel, this loosened assembly tore off. The rear axle jammed, and the train jerked sharply. The front of the train was hurled downward, and the rear cars were thrown upward, striking the tunnel ceiling. The drawbar broke off, and the first car, ripping free from its mounts, slammed into the back of the locomotive. In the front sat 22-year-old Marcelo Torres. The impact crushed his ribs, tore his lungs, damaged arteries. He lost almost all his blood before rescuers could even reach him. 10 other passengers suffered fractures, severe bruises, head injuries. The train stopped at an angle, wedged in the tunnel, and people had to wait while firefighters literally cut them out of the mangled train. Later, employees admitted they had heard a strange sound on the previous cycle, but decided not to stop the ride. After all, the train had just been serviced. That decision cost a man his life. Marcelo's family filed a lawsuit, stating that the pursuit of savings led to negligence. The case was settled out of court. Disney did not admit systemic violations. But the park quietly strengthened inspections and changed train maintenance protocols. Disneyland, the death of Deborah Stone at the America Sings show. July 1974, only 9 days after the opening of a new show, the patriotic musical program America Sings. A rotating theater turned the audience, moving spectators from one scene to another, with singing animatronics, colorful sets, and a deafening brass band. But in the design, there was a hidden killer, a barely noticeable gap between the rotating wall and the fixed section. Not fenced off, not marked. Dangerous. On the 8th of July, 18-year-old employee Deborah Gale Stone stood at the edge of the stage, greeting guests during the short 45-second pause between rotations. When the walls began to move, she for some reason ended up in that narrow gap. Maybe she stumbled. Maybe she stepped back. At first, guests heard her scream and thought it was part of the show. As the sector rotated, Deborah was crushed between the walls, tearing her body. A member of the audience, a serviceman, noticed that something was wrong and called employees. But it was too late. Deborah died instantly, Her body stuck until the platform fully stopped. Disney closed the show for modifications. They added sliding panels and warning lights. There was no public memorial. The family received compensation, but the sum was not disclosed. America Sings lasted another 14 years, and later the animatronics were moved into a future Disney hit, Splash Mountain. A Chinese park, a teenager thrown from a ride. A phone video begins like an ordinary weekend outing. Laughter, shouts of joy, a group of teenagers buckling into the seats of the Journey to the Space ride in Zhouhua Park. But just 13 seconds later, everything turns into a nightmare. 13-year-old Gong Yin spun through the air, thrown out of her seat. The seat belt snapped. The over-the-shoulder bar left a gap of 18 centimeters, enough for a teenager to slip out. Her body hit metal railings. The girl was thrown down. The other passengers screamed, not understanding what had happened. The investigation showed belts and restraints were defective. Staff did not check that belts were fastened. Gong's 6-year-old cousin was allowed on despite the age restriction. The last inspection was in 2013, although the paperwork claimed 2016. The video went viral on Chinese social networks. State television aired a report, and the park was immediately closed. The girl's parents received 870,000 yuan, roughly $126,700. But this was the third similar accident in 2 years. People were asking, to whom are our lives being entrusted, and for what money? Lagoon Park, the death of 6-year-old Ryan, California, Lagoon Park. Puff the Little Fire Dragon is a small coaster created specifically for children. The speed is 16 miles per hour. The height is just over 3 meters. It seems like the perfect first ride. But on the 30th of April 1989, this perfect children's coaster turned into a deadly trap. 6-year-old Ryan Bexted climbed out of his seat when the train stopped after the second lap. He thought the train had arrived at the station and stood up. But because of the track's design, part of the cars stopped behind the platform. It was only an intermediate stop before restarting. The operator, 18 years old, her first working weekend, was asked, "Do you want another lap?" And while the parents screamed, "Stop!" she started the ride again. Ryan, trying to climb back into the car, slipped between the rails. His father jumped over the fence, trying to reach him, but the train was already moving. The front car struck the child. Death was instantaneous. The operator collapsed to the ground, repeating, "I killed a child." But on paper, no system fault was found. There was no emergency brake. The design did not provide such a device. This is the only fatal accident on such a children's coaster anywhere in the world, but it showed that even kids' rides can be far more dangerous than they seem. Level 4, the grandmother and granddaughter, Nightmare in Indiana. On the 11th of August 1996 in the old Indiana Fun Park, a small children and family train, a simple mini locomotive with several cars, derailed on a turn and began to roll sideways. In the front sat 57-year-old Nancy Jones and her 4-year-old granddaughter Emily Hunt. The train accelerated past the safe 12 miles per hour and, flying off the turn, crashed into a tree. Nancy died instantly. Emily was crushed so badly that her spine was damaged above the chest. The girl became paralyzed. The investigation was staggering. In the previous 2 months, the train had derailed 79 times, sometimes up to 15 times a day. The fault log was full of reports. Anti-derailment systems were absent. The brakes were disabled, and on the speedometer, the needle was broken. And despite all this, the ride had passed 2 inspections. The inspector later admitted that he did not have the necessary qualifications. The park closed forever. The property was sold at auction. Emily and her family received $1.5 million. But the main legacy of the incident was a new law. Emily's Law, adopted by the state of Indiana in 1997. It tightened requirements for ride inspections and increased owner responsibility. And the remains of the old mini-trains still rust in a warehouse in Pennsylvania, where no one ever used them again. Glenwood Caverns, a fall from the haunted mine drop. On the 5th of September 2021, 6-year-old Wongel Estefanos and her family came to Glenwood Caverns in Colorado. Her attention was drawn to the haunted mine drop, a ride that lifts passengers up and drops them into a 33-meter vertical plunge into a dark shaft. The gimmick of the ride is the absence of a floor and the sudden drop in complete darkness. Each passenger was supposed to be fastened with 2 belts, and all belts had to be checked by the operators. This requirement was written in the manual that employees were supposed to know thoroughly. But on this day, Wongel sat in a seat where the belts had already been buckled from the previous cycle. The girl ended up sitting on top of the belts rather than inside them, and the staff did not notice this. The control panel gave a seatbelt error. The operators decided it was a system glitch and cleared the signal. They did not even walk over to check the belts by hand. The platform lowered, the ride dropped, and Wongel, not fastened by anything, fell into the shaft. She hit the concrete at the bottom. Multiple injuries. Death was instantaneous. The state investigation showed operators allowed guests to fasten themselves. No one understood the meaning of the error codes. Manual checks were not carried out. Employees confused safety system signals. Management did not conduct full training. And although all this was a classic example of a chain of negligence, no criminal case was opened. The family was stunned and openly called the decision a failure of justice. Later, the ride was renamed and completely rebuilt. A new cabin, 3-point belts, new panels. But the memory of Wongel remained much stronger than the metal. Perilous plunge, a fatal fall at Knott's Berry Farm. On the 21st of September 2001, Knott's Berry Farm hosted a private event. Among the guests was 40-year-old Lori Mason Lares, mother of 5 children. She sat in a boat on the perilous plunge ride, which promised a staggering vertical drop from a height of 115 feet and almost 80 kilometers per hour. The restraints were just a lap bar and a lap belt, but the design itself had been calculated for an average passenger weighing about 80 kilograms. Lori's weight, almost 133 kilograms, was outside the range that these restraints could safely hold. The operating manual warned about this, but staff did not conduct any weight checks or restrictions. Witnesses saw Lori trying to buckle herself, but the belt would not meet. Her 12-year-old daughter, seated next to her, pulled the belt with all her strength, and the operator standing on the platform did not even check whether it was properly secured. The boat began to rise, and it was already clear. The restraint was not sitting correctly. On the steep drop, Lori's body rose up, and she literally burst out of the seat. Passengers in other boats saw her being thrown over the edge and heard a dull blow as she hit metal trusses. Her head and legs struck the steel structure, and only then did her body fall into the water. Doctors pronounced her dead in less than an hour. The expert analysis determined the belt had been fastened under her abdomen, not over it. The lap bar did not hold her tightly enough. Employees did not physically check the restraint. The ride had no maximum weight parameters. The manual contained a direct warning about the risk of ejection of larger passengers. The park closed Perilous Plunge for modification, added 4-point restraints, but could not save the reputation. In 2012, the ride was dismantled. Lori's family received a large compensation, although Knott's never officially admitted guilt. Terminal velocity, a fall from 140 feet in Wisconsin Dells. On the 30th of July 2010, the Marty family was vacationing in Extreme World, a park of extreme rides in Wisconsin Dells. 12-year-old Tegan Marty decided to try terminal velocity, a free fall from a height of 43 meters straight into a net over air cushions. The process was supposed to be simple. The operator below raises the net. The operator above checks readiness. The teenager is lowered down in a special harness and released. But that day, the lower operator was busy. He was inflating the air cushions to raise the net. The upper operator, Charles Carnell, did not know or did not think about this. He simply pulled the release handle. Tegan dropped into emptiness. No net, no cushioning pads, just bare concrete. Her father was filming the fall on camera, and the recording shows her falling and then lying face down, losing consciousness. Blood was coming from her ears, nose, and mouth. Her lips turned purple. There was no detectable pulse. She miraculously survived. The impact stretched her spinal cord, but did not sever it. 10 fractured vertebrae, a shattered pelvis, brain swelling, partial paralysis, prolonged mechanical ventilation. Despite all this, the operator soon returned to work, while the investigation was ongoing. The park closed shortly after the incident. The owners could not withstand the barrage of lawsuits and financial pressure. The family filed a lawsuit, and the case ended in an out-of-court settlement. 3 months later, in a rehabilitation center, Tegan managed to move her toes, a small but symbolic victory. China, the collapse of space journey. June 2010, O-World Park in Shenzhen. Visitors lined up for the space journey ride, a centrifuge simulating rocket launches. Cabins of 4 people rotated around an axis, creating G-forces of about 2. Engineers admired the precision of the design, but in the middle of one of the runs, something happened that nobody had predicted. Part of the power shut down, there was a bang, and one of the load-bearing bolts hidden behind the casing popped out. A cabin broke free and slammed into neighboring cabins. People were thrown onto the concrete floor beneath the structure. The smell of burnt rubber, sparks, screams, bodies pinned by metal. Total chaos. 6 people were killed. 10 suffered severe head, bone, and internal injuries. Later investigators found this bolt could not be inspected without complete disassembly. The scheduled inspection had been formally passed, but no one had actually seen the components. The design originally allowed hidden defects. Similar rides across the country required urgent inspections. Nevertheless, for the dead and their families, this changed nothing. The tragedy unfolded in mere seconds. Raging River, a drowning at Adventureland. Raging River was a family ride operating since 1983. 6-seat round rafts, splashes of water, modest waves, and gentle spins. A fun park classic. On the 3rd of July, 2021, something happened that can only be described as a chain of catastrophic coincidences. Pump number 2 stopped working. The water level began to drop. Because of this, one empty raft got stuck on the metal frame. Operators heard the warning alarm, but simply hit the reset. Then the Harrow family raft entered the danger zone. The raft started to tilt, filling with water, and suddenly flipped. Inside, strapped into their seats, were 11-year-old Michael and 15-year-old David. The parents got out, the other children too, but the boys ended up face down underwater, unable to unbuckle their belts. Operators could not see the overturned raft. A bend in the course blocked their view. The emergency drainage system was also not working. Rescuers, random people and visitors, tried to lift the heavy structure by hand, but more than 5 minutes passed before they managed to reach the boys. Michael died in the hospital. David spent a month in an induced coma with irreversible brain damage. The inspection found 17 violations: malfunctioning pumps, untested drainage systems. The defective raft had been repaired only hours earlier. Warning alarms were ignored. Staff did not know how to use the emergency buttons. The ride was permanently closed in 2023. China, death on the scream. On the 1st of May 2015, a park in Jiangsu held a festive opening and demonstrated its new ride, the Scream. It rotated people upside down, accelerated them to high speeds, and promised unforgettable thrills. But when the operators cut power after seating the passengers, someone pulled the wrong handle. The motor activated before the safety restraints were closed. 5 people flew into the air like dolls. 2 of them, including an 18-year-old young man, died on the spot. The others suffered severe injuries, falling face first onto the concrete. The investigation revealed the park was operating without a license. The ride had been built at an illegal factory. The belts were ordinary bus buckles. There was no automation. Operators had no training whatsoever. The park was closed within hours. The owner was arrested, and photos and videos of the horrific moments spread through social networks for many months. Level 5. Expo Land, Japan. A 300-yard derailment. A warm May day in 2007, Expo Land Park in Osaka. Families were celebrating Children's Day. Everything was filled with sunlight and laughter. Passengers lined up for the Fujin Raijin 2, standing roller coasters that had been operating for 15 years. But moments after the second lift, there was a strange crack. One of the passengers turned, the car tilted, and then the nightmare began. The left axle under the second car broke off due to metal fatigue. The part, installed back in 1992, had never been replaced. Years of micro cracks, vibrations, and non-stop cycles had done their work. The car leaned to almost 45 degrees, and the first person it struck was 19-year-old Yoshino Kawahara, sitting in the front row. The blow came directly at the metal maintenance walkway. Her head was trapped between the seat and the guardrail, and the train kept going. 300 yards. For 300 yards, her body was dragged along the track, leaving a bloody trail. She died instantly. Another 18 people were injured. Fractures, dislocations, lacerations. The expert analysis showed mandatory annual teardowns of the ride had not been done, parts had not been replaced for decades. On some joints, glue had been used to reinforce cracks. Calculations showed that the safety level of this axle was between 1.6 and 2.8, with a norm of 10. That is, at the first serious stress, the structure was doomed. After the tragedy, the park tried to reopen, but a few months later, it closed for good. Inspections across the country identified another 15 rides in Japan with similar threats. Yoshino's death became the first of its kind in the country's history and left a deep mark on the industry. Luna Park, the ghost train fire. The ghost train was built in 1931, an old wooden haunted house ride lined with plywood. Tunnels of dark wood painted black, sharp turns, old lamps, props, rag dolls, and smoke effects that always smelled of burning. Inspectors had warned, no sprinklers, no marked exits, all materials flammable, wiring ancient and overloaded. But the deadlines for compliance were constantly pushed back. On the 9th of June 1979, at about 22:15, smoke began to come from inside. At first, staff thought it was part of the show. The smoke machines often produced a smell. But then screams were heard, and everything was swallowed by real fire. 4 12-year-old schoolboys and a father with 2 young sons were inside. People tried to break down walls, to find exits, but the maze was confusing. The fire turned the plywood and varnish into a raging torch in seconds. The smoke became so dense that people lost their bearings. The fire was so fierce that the walls charred within minutes. When the flames subsided, 7 bodies were found. The father was holding his 2 sons, pressing them to himself, his last protective gesture. The 4 schoolboys lay nearby. The investigation turned out to be strange. No traces of an electrical short were found. Some witnesses spoke of a smell of kerosene. Teenagers claimed they had heard bikers talking about arson. But the police quickly ruled it an accidental fire, although there was no solid evidence for that. Decades later, journalists from ABC discovered the investigation was led by an official linked to corrupt crime figure Abe Saffron. Witness statements disappeared. Some documents went missing. The government was interested in the land. It is one of Australia's darkest mysteries. Not a single person was ever held accountable. Dream World, the bloodbath on River Rapids. October 2016. Dream World Park on Australia's Gold Coast was packed. Thunder River Rapids. A family ride, not extreme, not seemingly dangerous. People had been riding it since the 1980s, laughing, splashing water, taking photos. But by 1400, pump number 2 broke down again. It had been failing for days. Staff simply pressed reset error and kept running the ride. A stuck, empty raft lying on metal rails remained in the danger zone. A minute later, a raft with 2 families entered that spot. The lack of water caused a collision. Both rafts rose vertically. The front one, like a guillotine, came down on the people. 4 adults, 2 men and 2 women, had no chance. Some were pulled into the moving mechanisms. Others were crushed between metal frames. The children sitting in the center somehow survived. One man tried to hold onto the edge, but the conveyor dragged him inside. Whistles, screams, engine roar, splashes of blood. Everything lasted seconds, but felt like eternity. The investigation pointed to horrific negligence. Recommendations to install water-level sensors, costing $3,000, had been ignored. The pumps had long required replacement. Operators were trained for only 90 minutes. One of them admitted that. He did not know how the emergency stop worked. Modifications in the 1990s had made the gaps between plates dangerous. The park closed for 6 weeks. Dreamworld received a record fine of $3.6 million. The ride was completely dismantled. Six Flags over Georgia, the decapitation of a teenager. On the 28th of June 2008, 17-year-old Asia Leon Ferguson came to Six Flags with his church group. Batman. The ride is an inverted coaster, legs dangling in the air, nearly 80 kilometers per hour, 5 inversions. One of the most popular rides. During the ride, Asia's cap flew off. After the ride, he decided to retrieve it. He climbed over 2 6-foot fences with danger signs, walked around the perimeter, and went under the track, into a zone where trains pass at a height just above a person's head. And then one of the trains, taking a turn at full speed, struck his head. The blow was instantaneous and irreversible. The teenager's head was literally torn off. The train continued moving. Passengers screamed, trying to explain to the operators what had happened. The park closed the ride for 1 day. Staff said the boy had been chasing his hat. The police later stated that in fact he had simply taken the shortest route, but that changed nothing. In 2002, an employee had died in the same spot when a passenger's leg struck his head. This zone had no sensors. The system could detect obstacles on the rails, but not underneath them. Level 6. The Haunted Castle Fire. On the 11th of May 1984, 8 teenagers entered the haunted castle at Six Flags Great Adventure. It was a huge structure of 14 trailers joined together. Narrow corridors, soft foam walls, actors in monster costumes, fog, strobe lights, and no sprinklers, no smoke detectors, no emergency exits. In a dark corridor, a 14-year-old boy held up a lighter to the wall to light the way for a younger friend. The foam caught fire instantly. The flames raced along the ceiling. The walls turned into torches. Actors thought the teenagers were screaming from fear. Visitors thought the smoke was part of the show. But within minutes, it became impossible to breathe. People ran in panic in the dark, bumped into dead ends, wandered among the trailers trying to find the only exit. It was hidden by a strobe light. In one corner near a ventilation shaft, they found the bodies of 8 teenagers. They had tried to breathe through the grate. They burned alive. The investigation uncovered. For 5 years, consultants had been demanding a fire safety upgrade. Six Flags ignored it. The park used a legal loophole, registering the attraction as temporary to avoid fire safety standards. Prosecutors charged the park with manslaughter, but the court dismissed all charges, citing insufficient proof of intent. Nevertheless, it was after this tragedy that the United States introduced strict fire safety standards for all dark rides. Schlitterbahn, the tragedy on the giant water slide. Verrückt, a word that in German means crazy. That is what they called the giant water slide. 170 feet high, almost 52 meters, recognized as the tallest in the world. To reach the launch, guests climbed 264 steps, hearing the roar of water and the screams of people already racing down this monstrous drop. On the 7th of August 2016, on the upper platform, stood 10-year-old Caleb Schwab, the son of a local congressman. In the same 3-person raft with him sat 2 women. Their combined weight met the requirements, but the weight distribution was uneven. A light child in front, 2 adults behind, a formula that had already caused dangerous moments, which the designers knew about. The raft set off. The first drop went normally, but on the second hill, everything went wrong. The raft was launched into the air. It literally flew like a cardboard toy. Caleb, sitting in front, was thrown upward directly into a protective metal arch covered with netting. His head struck the metal crossbar. The impact was of monstrous force, instantaneous death. The 2 women behind suffered serious head and neck injuries. The raft crashed back onto the slide, hitting the surface so hard that they received deep cuts and fractures. The most terrible thing was that the engineers already knew that rafts tended to lift off. During tests, sandbags had repeatedly flown off the slide. Precisely because of this, they had installed the net and metal supports, which eventually became a deadly trap. The project's ideologue, Jeffrey Henry, had practically no engineering education. He dropped out of school and, without professional expertise, made key design decisions. Many technical teams complained. There were no calculations, no proper documentation, tests were superficial. The Grand Verrückt operated for 2 years despite all this, and all that time, it relied on blind luck. After the tragedy, an audit identified 147 safety violations on various park rides. The project was shut down. The structure was dismantled in 2018. Caleb's family received a compensation of $20 million, and the injured women received additional payouts. But this did not make the top of the slide any less sinister. Verrückt forever remained a symbol of how the thirst for records can sometimes cost more than human life. Texas Giant, a 75-foot fall. The 19th of July, 2013, Six Flags over Texas. Texas Giant is a hybrid wooden and steel coaster, 14 stories high, with a steep drop of almost 80 degrees. A monster among roller coasters. 52-year-old Rosa Esparza sat in one of the cars with her family. Before the start, she, like many others, checked the T-shaped lap bar, but her latch clicked only once, unlike the double click heard at other seats. Rosa raised her hand and addressed the operator. "It does not seem fully latched." The operator replied, "If it clicked once, that is enough." But it was not enough. Rosa trusted the staff's words and rode. During the first big drop, her daughter, sitting in the car ahead, accidentally turned around and saw that her mother had risen above the seat, holding the lap bar with her hands. Her body was already half out of the car. A second later, Rosa was thrown from the car. She fell 75 feet, just over 22 meters. First, she hit a metal support structure, then the roof of a tunnel. Staff searched for the body for almost an hour until the police discovered it in a zone beneath the track. The autopsy report described the most severe chest and pelvic injuries, incompatible with life. The inspection revealed a faulty restraint sensor at her seat. The system could display "locked" even when the bar was not fully closed. The ride was closed, seat belts were added, the restraint design was changed. But for the family, it changed nothing. Rosa's loved ones said she had merely asked to have her restraint checked. Just once. New Taipei, an explosion at a water festival. 516 injured summer, 2015, Taiwan. At Formosa Fun Coast Park, the Color Play Asia party was underway. Dancing, a DJ, neon beams, crowds of young people in swimsuits under the open sky. Organizers sprayed colored cornstarch powder above the stage, huge clouds of bright dust lit by spotlights. People jumped to the music, hands up, phones recording everything. But too much powder hung in the air, a thick, dense cloud visible even on phone screens. Then the impossible happened. At 2030, a 200-watt spotlight heated up to 400 degrees Celsius. One spark was enough for the entire suspension to ignite. A wave of fire raced through the crowd. People burst into flames instantly. Skin, clothing, hair, screams, panic, people throwing themselves into the pool trying to extinguish the flames. The water turned red from blood and peeled skin. The flame lasted only 40 seconds, but the consequences were monstrous. 516 injured, 199 in critical condition. 15 people died. Most suffered burns over 60 to 90% of their bodies. The hospitals did not have enough donor skin. Supplies were brought in from all over the island. The investigation established the powder had been improperly certified. It was sprayed in a cloud that was too dense. It was impossible to switch off the fans. The controls had frozen. Firefighters used carbon dioxide extinguishers, which only spread the burning dust. The main organizer was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The park was closed. The events became one of the largest mass technological disasters in Taiwan.